Good evening, everyone, and welcome to SocialFlight Live. I'm Jeff Simon. We have a fantastic show for you tonight. George Brawley is here from General Aviation Modifications, otherwise known as GAMI. Really excited. I'll tell you, every time I talk to George, I just learn new things. It's absolutely fantastic, and I am thrilled to have him here again with you tonight to share his knowledge. Before we get started, a few things. First of all, we are now entering the last month of SocialFlight's Fly to Win Challenge, at least for this Fly to Win Challenge cycle, and we are giving away a Lightspeed Zulu 3 headset on March 1st. So be sure to check out socialflight.com and the free SocialFlight apps for Apple and Android devices. All you need to do is get the app and get out there and fly. It allows you to check in at an airport. You'll get points for that. And if you just do that once during the prize period, you are entered to win. And for those of you that are already playing and are out there and doing and racking up a lot of points in the challenge, that just gets you extra entries and your chance to win that Lightspeed Zulu 3 headset. So get out there and check all that out. We created SocialFlight in order to support you in general aviation and to keep everyone engaged, especially at times like this, of course, when general aviation's been going through so many different cycles of challenge in the beginning and then supply chain challenges, and all the while people are really finding that general aviation is having this revolution, that it really is the opportunity to give people access to how to travel in a way that is safe, gives them access to so many different areas and so much flexibility. And so it has been a tumultuous, but in some ways a really wonderful time for general aviation. And so appreciate having you along, and SocialFlight Live is one of the reasons we're here and doing that. Now, in the last 50 years of general aviation, few people that I can think of have had as much of an impact on the way that we operate our aircraft engines as George Brawley. Beginning in 1994, aeronautical engineers George Brawley and Tim Roehl founded General Aviation Modifications, otherwise known as GAMI, in order to obtain an STC to install balanced fuel injectors on Continental Motors engines. Since that time, the company has become the leader in engine technology solutions, including their Tornado Alley turbo conversions, engine cooling STCs, and now what may become the savior for general aviation and our fuel crisis with their new unleaded fuel, the G100L UL fuel from GAMI, which we're going to talk to George as well about. I consider every opportunity, as I mentioned, to speak with George a masterclass in aviation. So let me bring George on the line right now, and please help me welcome to SocialFlight Live, George Brawley. How are you doing, George?
Good evening. I'm doing fine.
Thank you so much for joining us. I really do appreciate it.
What do you want to talk about this evening?
Well, let's get started first of all with an update, because if there's one thing that every time I have talked to you is capitalizing your life, your livelihood, and your mind share, it's been getting us out of this 100 low lead crisis. And it seems like every few hours there's some new news. What's the latest?
So we last did SocialFlight, what, the first week or so in December?
December 7th, yes, sir.
So actually there's been a lot that's happened since then. Just a brief recap. Back at Oshkosh, we got the initial approved model list STCs for aircraft and engines. Had a small number of airplanes, a small number of engines. That caused a lot of consternation because everybody said, yeah, okay, this is, what good does this do? But it included engines that require 100 low lead, and that was kind of overlooked. And we told everybody we're going to go to work, and by sometime next summer we'd get the rest of the spark ignition fleet of engines and associated aircraft. So we started out that way to just do the initial one and then a final one, but events intervened, and the FAA changed the game plan, and so we started in to do an intermediate AML, which happened with rather rapid speed because it turned out the data package supported lots and lots of engines and aircraft without this last pair of tests that we're in the process of doing. So in October, we got a huge AML expansion that included 611 additional engines, make and model engines. And then we went back to work to get all the associated aircraft. And there's an enormously intense database mining operation involved, because you have to go into the FAA's type certificate database. We had to write some custom software to go in and mine out the applicable airplanes and engines. But we got that done for the engine, then we turned around to do it for the aircraft. And sometime about the time I was talking with you, we had that initial aircraft AML list done. And I actually have a copy of it here. I'll share it with you in a second. But we submitted it, and it was ready for signature. And all of a sudden, we got this big giant stop, don't sign that thing. Went to the certification office in Wichita that was in charge of the project. And so apparently the powers that be in Washington had other ideas. And so what happened is that in middle December, Washington ordered a complete top to bottom audit done on the G100 UL STC and everything that's been done for the last 12 years. You know,
oh, man.
What else can happen in the saga? I mean, after all, we've been 12 years. There'd already been 25 senior aircraft power plant and aircraft engineers and managers and literally directorates. I mean, the head of the engine propeller directorate had been here to AIDA to look at the project. You know, there's been no project I know of in the history of the FAA that's had closer scrutiny than what this G100 UL project has had. So, you know, we kind of groaned when that happened, but I said, well, okay, what can we do to help? And they said, well, we're going to work on this. But they assigned the Atlanta Aircraft Certification Office, you know, down in Atlanta, to go north to Wichita to do a complete top to bottom audit.
God.
And, you know, that doesn't happen very often. But, you know, the people in Washington were being cautious. They wanted to make sure it had all been done right and there weren't any surprises. And, you know, frankly, I don't blame them for that. And my thought process was, I don't have anything to worry about. And this, you know, may take some time, but by God, it'll be a good thing, not a bad thing when we get it done. And so I volunteered to hang around through Christmas and help whoever the auditors were and give them documents and answer questions. And to their everlasting credit, the senior auditor that they had on this thing out of Atlanta worked his backside off all the way through Christmas and New Year's. And I stayed at my desk literally six and a half days a week, you know, 12, 14 hours a day, answering questions and feeding him documents that he wanted to see out of the certification file. And on January 30, he finished the audit. And it was a clean deal, completely clean. No unsatisfactories, no ifs, uts, buts, or anything else. And so that went up to Washington. And the next thing that happened was Washington sent back a request to the certification team in Wichita and said, well, we want a big giant cover report.
We want an audit of the audit.
And so they went to work doing that. Well, it ended up being a 53-page document.
53-page cover letter.
Yeah, that covers the audit. And it basically describes in detail every step and baby step that was done at every juncture on this 12-year-long saga. It reads like a PhD or a master's thesis. I got to tell you, it's one of the single best pieces of technical writing, not only that I've ever seen come out of a government office, but that I've ever seen in my life. I mean, I just, you know, I was kind of blown away with the quality of that piece of work.
Wow.
So that's now being subject to review in Washington. In the meantime, our poor aircraft expansion AML to go with the 611 engines has been waiting for a signature. Now, just to give everybody some hope, let me share this with you a little bit. This is actually the aircraft AML.
Yep, we got it.
And And, you know, you can see that it's a list, but it's not just a list. This thing is 42 frigging pages. And, you know, some of these lines have got 8 or 10 make and models on each line on the list. And I don't know how many airplane make and models there. There's 1,100, 1,500 make and model aircraft. Anyway, that's waiting to be signed. It was scheduled to be signed before the audit, but it's still waiting to be signed. So that's what we've been doing. Now that's, you know, that's been this giant paperwork distraction from doing the real work, which is to get the last two, push-ups done for certification tasks, which is a flight in the Piper and then a 150-hour engine test. So we haven't neglected that. Of course, you have to go through all the rigmarole, which includes doing conformity on the aircraft and conformity on the engine parts to be assembled. So we got the conformity inspection done on the aircraft last week for the PA32I0540 operation and flight and engine run. And then also last Tuesday, which was a really, really amazing and fun experience for me, I went up to Tulsa to Power Masters to Bill Cunningham's shop because he's going to build the engine for the final run. By the way, this is an I0550N, which is, depending on which Continental document you read, either an 8.5 or an 8.7 to 1. When we measure it, it's 8.7 or 8.75 to 1 compression ratio engine. And then when we do this engine run, it will be mated with the Cirrus turbo normalizing system. So it will be the first time that a high compression turbocharged engine has ever done an FAA fuel certification run ever on an unleaded avgas.
Wow.
But that's not the end of the story, because the end of the story is that we're not, the engine's rated at 310 at 30 inches of manifold pressure as a turbo normalized engine. But we have proposed that the test be done at an elevated horsepower, and the exact horsepower remains to be determined during the calibration test run at the beginning of the test. But it's somewhere between 340 and 360 horsepower. And we may even do that at 2,600 instead of 2,700, just to play nice with the European noise requirements. But that engine ultimately should be available as an STC for the fleet of nearly 1,000 TN SR-22s that are out there flying around, and those owners are going to love it. And then eventually it's going to be available for airplanes like the one that's behind me, in a higher horsepower configuration.
Wow.
So by the way, we're planning on blending 8,000 gallons of fuel to run that 350 horsepower engine for 150 plus hours for that durability test. But I got to tell you, last Tuesday up at Bill's, we had the FAA MITO guy there, Billy Hutchinson, and he was with Bill. Bill had everything beautifully laid out on 3 tables in his hangar. Had all the cylinder parts on one table, the crankshaft and the camshaft and all the related parts on the middle table, and then the crankcase and a computer screen with the Continental overhaul manual on the 3rd table. And Bill and the FAA DAR were just almost doing this tango of 2 going around. Bill was measuring and the DAR was writing down. And frankly, you know, I mean, Bill had his entire array of calipers and of, 10 different size calipers and 10 different size micrometers and, 6 sets of feeler gauges and 4 or 5 great big long dial indicators for bore measurements, and all that stuff arrayed out there. And he was manipulating all that stuff. I swear to God, it looked like a master concert pianist playing a Tchaikovsky piano concerto. It was a thing of beauty to watch, from an engineering point of view.
And
so
just
anyway,
to point out, George, for everybody out there, so they don't necessarily know, like, you've got, before you can run these tests, you've got to do a conformity inspection. You got to make sure every part of the aircraft, every part of the engine meets exact tolerances. It's exactly the right thing before you can run a test to do that. Is that what's happening in this?
Yeah, but that's really not the most important part of it. The most important part of it is to do those measurements and carefully document it so that when you get to the end of the test, you can go back and tear the engine down and remeasure the same parts and measure the wear that's taken place or not. Okay. Uh, and so, you know, it's a critical part of it. And we have to end up doing exactly the same dance at the end of the test that we did at the beginning. You know, I'll be back up at Tulsa with Cunningham and the same FAA MITO DAR guy going back through measuring all those same parts a second time.
Wow.
And then write the report. And when we do that, we're done. And then there comes out another one of these AML lists that includes the balance of all the aircraft and all the engines. And when I say all, I mean all of the spark ignition piston engines that's found anywhere that you can search in the FAA's type certificate database, and all of the associated aircraft that use those engines.
That's amazing. So we're on the edge. It's coming. It's coming soon.
It looks like we're going to get there. I don't see any showstoppers with this test. Keep in mind, we've already done this test once on a Lycoming engine, and the parts came out spectacularly good and clean with almost undetectable wear. You know, I mean, the cylinders were spectacularly clean because they didn't have lead in them. So this is basically a verification test of a test we've already successfully completed. And we know how to do this test on our test stand. We've done 3 FAA Part 33 endurance certification tests over the last 15 years on this same test stand. And all of those engines passed their certification requirements and became certified engines in one form or another. So it's not like we hadn't done this before. We know how to do this. And,
right.
It's probably the best engine test facility in the world at which to do it. So we'll get there.
And is there any type of date that you're looking at right now to tell people?
You know, that's the worst thing somebody in my place can do is pick a date. But I mean, I'm hoping to get the engine. I mean, give you an idea. Bill Cunningham calls me up today and said, George, I'm trying to assemble this engine, but guess what? There's no rod bolt nuts available in the supply chain.
Oh, God.
There's no new rod bolt nuts available in the supply chain. What are we going to do? I can't build the engine without nuts to tighten down the rod bolts. And I said, well, what about using used nuts? And he said, well, that's what I was getting ready to suggest. And I said, well, you know, we'll have to take a deviation with the FAA, but I said, structurally, I don't think that's a problem. So that's what we ended up doing is we took a deviation to put used, you know, rod nut bolts on this new engine. You know, just, you know, what else can go wrong, Jeff?
No kidding. No kidding. I mean, you've been through these tests so many times with so many different products. You've done it for Tornado Alley turbos. Tell me something. I mean, you got a phase of development that you do to decide what you're going to do with the product, and then you've got this FAA stuff to run through all these incredibly detailed tests. Does anything ever really come up during those, or is this just a whole lot of work just to document nowhere?
Well, the fuel thing has been very different. I mean, the longest it's ever taken us to do an STC project of any kind in the past, a couple of years. But some of them we've done in 4 or 5 months. The Cirrus turbo normalized thing was a really, really big deal because Cirrus was desperate to get it done because they were getting killed by the Columbia 400 and they did not have a turbocharged product on their product line. And they wanted it yesterday when they contracted with us to do that in April of 2006. That's a really big project. And because Cirrus is such a high volume OEM, it had a real high visibility level inside the small airplane directorate in Kansas City. But we went to work. We had 2 conforming prototypes for Cirrus to use as demos at Oshkosh, 3.5, 4 months later. And we got down to October and we're ready to get the STC, and then we had a hiccup where there was some question about the compliance of the spring-loaded, magnet-loaded alternate air door to the most current version of the FARs. And we went to work and got an equivalent level of safety finding, which is a really big deal, and it normally takes months. And the FAA went to work on that. We got it done in 8 days flat.
Wow. Wow.
So yeah, when the FAA is, suitably motivated, that sort of thing can happen. But we had that STC done by the, beginning of November, 6 months later. And Cirrus started delivering airplanes from the factory in December of 2006.
Wow.
And in the next 12 months, they delivered 500 turbo-normalized Cirruses. Maybe the single most successful STC in the history of the FAA. So yeah, they can be done expeditiously. This one's taken 12 years.
Wow. Well, we all wish you luck. Everybody's watching you, and I can tell you that everybody appreciates all those lost hours of sleep and extra days and everything that you're doing there. It's amazing, and it's going to be amazing to see not only how it averts this crisis, but what happens to help maintenance throughout the fleet when we don't have to deal with lead.
Oh my gosh. Right now, how often do you have to clean your spark plugs?
Mm-hmm.
Hours, 100 hours?
Spark plugs, oil changes, all sorts of stuff, piston issues and rings, and who knows what we're going to benefit from in the long run once we see the lead go out of this fuel.
I mean, the field experience for people that have burned leaded fuel in high performance race car engines, including a recognizable 6-cylinder horizontally opposed race car engine that some of you may be familiar with. When they change from leaded fuel to unleaded fuels, their TBOs tripled on those race cars. The oil change intervals should go up dramatically, and my sincere hope and expectation, and it's based on some pretty good data that I have, is that we should be able to go to a synthetic motor oil.
That'd be great.
At one time, when I first started running turbo-normalized Bonanzas Lena Peak, it was when Mobil 1 had first come out. And the problem with Mobil 1 is that it didn't scavenge the lead.
Right.
And so, T210s and whatnot that ran with really GAMI-rich mixtures had lots of lead that was plug-in passages and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what caused the oil to be withdrawn from the market.
Yep.
But by the time that happened, I had 1,500 hours on that TN IO550 in an airplane like the one behind me. 1,500 hours. And so when the thing came and Mobil said, yeah, we'll help pay for an overhaul, I was at about 1,500 hours, and I said, well, I'm going to take advantage of that. We tore that engine down that had 1,500, and we're not talking about low power operation. I was consistently running that at 80% of 300 horsepower, but running it with a lean mixture. We tore that thing down, having run all that time on Mobil 1 synthetic motor oil, and the engine was pristine inside. There wasn't any evidence of any deposit or anything, but that's because it had been primarily run with a lean mixture, so that the amount of leaded fuel that went through it was dramatically reduced. And even then, that synthetic oil was able to take care of it. So I'm, based on that experience, I'm really hopeful that we'll be able to develop a synthetic motor oil. And frankly, I would invite, people in the aviation motor oil business to get in touch with us and start to plan around being able to do that.
That'd be great.
Just makes all kinds of good sense. And in my typical oil change intervals during that period of time when I was doing that, and I was having oil samples done, but I was running typically a minimum of 70 hours between oil changes. And there were 2 or 3 times when I went out to 110 or 120 hours between oil changes, and the oil was fine.
That's
I had one of my neighbors one weekend. I was out, had the hangar door open. It was pretty spring weather, and he came over and was snooping around my airplane, and he pulls the dipstick and looks at it, says, "Oh, you just changed your oil." And I said, "Well, not exactly." He said, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Well, the last time I changed it was 70 hours ago." But he looked at it, and it looked like brand new oil.
Yeah.
And you know, that's what can happen when you get the lead out and
Wow.
and run with appropriate mixtures.
That's going to be great. I want to ask you one more question before we move from fuel on to so many other things that you're doing. There's a lot of aircraft that have had a lot of modifications also to them, higher compression mods, STCs, things like that. How will people address that? How will that apply to the fuel when you've got this huge AML, you have all these things, but there's been some mods to higher compression, turn a 150 into 160 or something like that?
So actually, Jeff, I think this is the first time anybody's ever asked me that question, and it's a really good question, but I think I know the answer to it. So if this STC will have standard language in it, like every STC does. It says when the STC is installed, the person doing the installation must determine its compatibility with all other previous modifications. And
Yep.
so whoever is putting this STC on the airplane is responsible for making that determination. So if somebody has got an STC and they've put, say, a higher compression engine on there, then somebody's got to make that determination. However, the data is there. The fuel has, detonation testing that has been done and witnessed and approved by the FAA that demonstrated the ability of a turbocharged engine with high compression to operate at 130% of its rated horsepower and still pass a full-blown FAA standard detonation test. So I frankly don't think there's going to be any concern for anybody out there. I mean, at full power and full rich, the detonation characteristics of this fuel are frankly better, significantly better than 100 low lead.
Right.
I mean, the supercharged rating runs a minimum of about 145 to 150, whereas the supercharged rating on 100 low lead typically runs a minimum of 130 and typically 131 to 133. So, the Warbird guys ought to love that.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, I mean, layering STCs is a thing that AMPs and IAs are used to doing all day long. That AML is the difference, I think. I think most modifications that are out there, most STCs that change engines, really are emulating other engines anyway that are already out there. And so an AMP should be able to look at that, I would hope, and say, well, we're basically turning it into this engine, and this engine is on the list.
Stop thinking about something, Jeff. One of the engines is in the type certificate database. It's the engine on a DC-7 and a Lockheed Constellation. Do you think that's really going to be a problem?
Little tiny engine, no compression going on.
No horsepower per cubic inches there.
No kidding. Wow.
You're talking 1 horsepower per cubic inch on those engines or more.
Wow. And is this going to include engines that don't necessarily need 100 low lead or anything, like Rotax, stuff like that?
Yeah, all the engines that are eligible to use 100 low lead, of any description that's in the type certificate database will be eligible to use this fuel.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, listen, I could talk fuel with you all night long, but we're already halfway through the show, and I've got to pick your brain on some more stuff here. And one of the things I want to pick your brain on is right over your left shoulder there, that gorgeous Bonanza that I know is a very special Bonanza to you. Other shoulder.
Yeah, that shoulder.
That's right. And I'm going to start with the fact that I got a keen eye. And I know that there's an extra hole on that nose bowl on the left side. So tell me a little bit about, let's switch here. Tell me a little bit about this plane, because past fuel, you've always got cool things in the works.
You're not supposed to see that hole. So the first high performance plane that I flew was a 1965 Mooney Super 21. They had this funny little square hole up on the nose bowl.
Yep.
And there was a little trap door behind it and a little lever that you pushed and pulled on the panel. Yep. And if you got up 6, 8, 10,000 feet and you pull that lever and open that thing, your manifold pressure went up somewhere between a half and maybe an inch and an inch of manifold pressure. It was kind of fun. I mean, it was, something nobody else had. So I got to thinking one day and I thought, if you really understand the power plant engineering and you go look at the equations in the textbooks that allow you to make a textbook paper prediction of the horsepower that a new paper design engine might produce, buried down in the equations in a term that's got an exponent on it, and in the exponent is the ratio of the manifold pressure to the exhaust gas back pressure. And so if you raise the manifold pressure, the horsepower goes up. Yeah, we all know that. But if you lower the exhaust gas back pressure, the horsepower goes up too, because the volume of fresh air you can get in and out of the cylinder increases because of the lower exhaust back pressure. And I thought, if I put a ram air door on this turbo normalized Bonanza, what's it going to do? Well, the controller is going to keep the manifold pressure at the same 30 inches. But if you pick up an inch or an inch and a half of ram air going into the compressor, then the compressor has got a pressure ratio at 16,000 feet or so, 15 of about 2 or 2.1 or 2 to 1. So that 1 or 1.5 inches is going to translate into 3 inches. But then the controller sitting back there is going to ratchet that back down to 30. But how does it do that? Well, it gets to slow down the turbocharger. It gets to open the wastegate. Well, what does all that do for the back pressure? It reduces the back pressure. But if the turbocharger doesn't have to pressurize it so much, what does that do to the temperature of the induction air that's going into the engine? It drops it. So it ends up being a win-win-win situation. You drop the induction air temperature by a noticeable amount. Every 10 degrees you drop it, gets you 1% in horsepower. And you reduce the back pressure by a substantial amount. And the turbocharger doesn't have to work so hard. Oh, and by the way, if you're one of those guys that likes to fly really high, it's going to increase the service ceiling at full rated manifold pressure by somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000 feet. So, it's a beautiful win-win-win in every respect.
Yeah, maintenance goes down, fuel efficiency, speed goes up. I love it.
So as you're looking at that hole right there, by the way, that's a mirror image of the hole that's on the other side. How am I doing this? Yeah, here on the other side. The one on the other side, on the starboard side of the aircraft, is a mirror image, and that's the ram air hole for the air that goes to the intercooler. And doing that alone increased the intercooler efficiency by 10%, just by going from a non-ram air source of air to the intercooler to that source. So I knew that it worked and would work. So the one you see on the port side, on the left side of the engine, you can see the little shiny, let's see how I do this. Yeah, right there. That's the induction tube that goes straight back to the compressor, which is right there where I'm pointing. So you get that straight shot ram air into the compressor, and then the compressor, does its magic and sends the air over to the intercooler on the other side and then into the engine. So that's a really efficient layout. It's got a little butterfly valve in it, so you can close it in case you're getting sleet or ice or rain or something. but I've flown this, and of course there's another little piece of magic on this airplane, and we have an electronic wastegate controller on this airplane. And so for an engineering wonk like me, this is like, candy in a Play Store. So I can share with you that about a year ago, I was coming back from Georgia, and there's actually some data on this that's up on the BeachTalk.org website. But we had a big headwind, so we were staying down low. I don't even remember, 6, 7, 8,000 feet, but we were well under 10,000. I think it was somewhere in that neighborhood. And we were, we left out of Georgia and we were somewhere across Mississippi. And so I turned off all the automatic controls on that system and overrode them because I've got a little, George switch up on the on the controls in the cockpit. Well, the plane's inexperimental, for God's sakes. Okay.
I love the George switch. I want one.
And so, it's a little toggle switch, and every time I bump it, just momentarily bump it, the manifold pressure goes up an inch. And I bump it the other way, and the manifold pressure goes down an inch. And so I bumped it up, and we're running lean to peak, and I bumped it up to about 35 and a half, maybe 36 inches. But we're 90, 100 degrees lean to peak. And sitting there watching the cylinder heads, they stabilize at about something horrific like 340 degrees. And so I'm sitting there looking, and I'm 90, 100 degrees lean to peak. Fuel flow's like 19.5. Well, at that point, the brake specific's about 0.38, 0.385. You do the math, it's making 300 horsepower.
Wow.
In straight and level flight. And it's got this really nice new Macaulay propeller on it that we're trying to help Macaulay get fielded. And its sucker is really efficient and quiet and smooth. And it's the best propeller I have ever flown behind in a piston-powered aircraft, bar none. Although I think I'm getting ready to fly a Hartzell prop that's going to be roughly the equivalent to it. But the airplane was making, keep in mind, this is a long wing B-36TC that's been converted, and it's not a clean airframe. It's got TKS on the wings, for God's sakes. We're sitting there at about 199 knots.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
We're talking barren speeds in a single engine bonanza. This may be at level flight and cruise. You may be looking at the fastest single engine bonanza, in a certifiable configuration anywhere in the world.
That's amazing. And I have to confess that when I saw that hole there, I kind of knew what was going on because my first STC project that I ever did and PMA'd was looking at the same thing, looking at what Mooney did. Even though they had some problems, what Mooney did with Ram Air, I did it and experimented in it and created an STC for Grumman. So as soon as I saw that on the left side, right where the prop blade comes up and sweeps into that hole, I'm like, oh, he's doing Ram Air.
You got it right.
That's awesome. That is really, really cool. And I'm excited to see you do that and experiment, of course, with the propeller there. And I'm also excited you're doing the Hartzell. We're about to start experimenting on ours with Hartzell's Navigator prop as well. And so we'll see how your data with that amazing engine compares to just the stock stuff that we're doing with that Navigator.
Mind, Hartzell has shipped us a propeller that they want us to run on this 150-hour engine test. And it's a new Hartzell propeller, and we're going to do the qualification run for Hartzell as part of that 150-hour field test that we're getting ready to run.
Oh, that's awesome. That's going to be really, really cool. Absolutely. Wow. All right. Well, that helps, of course, those guys, but you're going to be using all this data to certify things. You've talked about going into Cirruses. You've talked about that. One of the things I do not want to miss, I opened up the show by talking about the impact that you've had on general aviation, which goes from GAMI injectors to the fuel you're working on, mods like this. But there's a lot of things that a lot of people don't know. And one of them, we talked about what the single most innovative thing that you've done is, and I'm hoping you brought your little sample with you here, because you saved an entire fleet of aircraft. There are generations of people that are, in my opinion, indebted to you for keeping aircraft flying, and I want you to talk about that and what you did with the Beach Mentors.
Well, my older brother learned to fly in a T-34 as a naval cadet in 1965 and 66. And then he's made about 130 trips to Hanoi and Haiphong in an F-8 Crusader off the deck of 2 different aircraft carriers. So T-34s go a long ways back in my memory. We bought one in 1998, 99, 98, I guess. And it's a beautiful airplane. It's one of the very lowest time T-34s in the fleet. And we bought it just in time for that first accident that happened down at Sky Warriors in Atlanta, where they were flying the snot out of the airplanes and pulling 6Gs. And that's a lie. They were pulling how many? Not 6.
Not 6.
They'd been doing it for years. And sure enough, they put some fatigue cracks in a wing just outboard of the wing bolt, and one of the wings folded. Good Lord heaven, that you should never see the video that was in the cockpit of the T-34 when the wing folded over the top and collapsed the canopy. It's an NTSB video, and we got to look at it because we were doing research on the thing. But I don't think that video is available publicly. But it just, you can't watch that as a pilot without just, putting your head in your lap. It was such a horrible thing to see. And then, as I recall, this, we're talking 20 something years ago, but not too long after that, they had a second one, and it failed in exactly the same rivet hole, in exactly the same spot on the right wing. Why did it fail on the right wing and not the left wing? Because you're sitting in the airplane and you're right-handed and you decide to roll, you can always roll harder to the left than you can to the right. So when you roll to the left, you load up the right wing, and so it accumulated fatigue faster than the left wing did. It's called physics and stuff, So that resulted in a huge stink, and there was a lot of movement in the FAA to ground that fleet of airplanes. They finally let them fly under severe speed and G restrictions. Sky Warriors folded in Atlanta, but they sold their airplanes down to Houston. But in the meantime, Tim and I went to work to try and get a repair for that known problem place right there on the wing, so that we could get it repaired and get those airplanes flying again. And we hired a superb fatigue damage tolerance DER by the name of Victor Juarez. And Victor had cut his teeth doing the F-111 center carry-through section at General Dynamics back in the 60s. And they had a center carry-through failure, by the way, from fatigue, overload, I'm not sure which. He had as much experience. He was as well regarded in the FAA as a fatigue damage tolerance guy as there was anywhere in the FAA. And he worked with us, and I learned an awful lot from Vic. I mean, just, you got to really appreciate mentors as you go along in this business. And so we started working in 2000 or so to find a solution to that, and we came up with a fix for that outboard section that was outboard of the wing bolt. And it was a pretty straightforward fix. It wasn't that expensive. It was, it took, I don't know, 8 or 10 hours of mechanic time to install it. But it also called for eddy current inspections of those rivet holes. We ended up inspecting every rivet hole in every T-34 in the fleet for that repair. And we didn't find any cracks. The only airplanes that had cracks were those that had been abused in mock aerial combat. I mean, literally, we looked, I've forgotten the count, but take 300 airplanes and multiply it times about 10 rivet holes, you got 3,000 rivet holes. Wasn't a single crack in any of them except for the airplanes that were used in mock aerial combat. So, there was that, but it was still a legitimate concern as the fleet was going to get older. And so it was an appropriate repair to fix, the highest fatigue spot in the airplane. Unfortunately, while all that was going on, they had another airplane failed that was being flown by Texas Sky Warriors, Texas Air Aces, which is Sky Warriors in Atlanta and Air Aces in Houston. And that plane failed in a different place. It failed in the center section of the airplane, if you will, in a T-34 under the right hip of the front seat pilot.
Yep.
Just inboard of that same wing bolt, which it had previously been failing outboard. Mm-hmm. And it was a big, ugly set of fatigue cracks right there. And unfortunately, the only way to repair that was to disassemble the entire airplane and rebuild the center section with new metal. And you're talking an $80,000-$100,000 repair on an airplane that wasn't worth $150,000-$200,000 on the outside, and a third of that was in the avionics.
Yep.
It was a prescription to turn the fleet into beer cans. Just all it was. Mm-hmm. And everybody in the T-34 world was in a hissy fit, just going crazy on it. So because we had been so deeply involved in it, we had one of them. I don't know. God came down and spoke to me one morning while I was standing in the shower, and I came up with this wild, hairy idea. And the idea was, the problem is that the bottom portion of the wing spar, that's down where the lower wing skin is, or the lower fuselage skin is, that section of the spar on the bottom gets pulled in tension when you start pulling G's, and it's that tension load on that aluminum down there that's creating the fatigue cracks. And we need to find some way to stop that tension load on that lower section. And I'm thinking, well, why can't we put a giant rubber band in there and just kind of hold it together so we minimize that tension load? Instead of a big tension load, it's either small or very little. Well, what kind of rubber band? Well, a rubber band won't do the trick, but maybe we could. Well, of course, the problem is gaining access. But if you're familiar with bonanzas and barons, you know that under the main wing bolt on the bottom of each side, there's a little mouse hole, access hole, that you can open up at access panel. You can actually see up into that lower wing spar section. And so I said, well, maybe I could thread a rubber band through there, maybe, and call it, instead of call it a rubber band, call it a steel cable or something. It's got to be flexible. So I had that idea, and I went to my desk at the airport, the same desk I'm still sitting at, and I started building a spreadsheet, and I ran all the numbers and the calculations to see what could be done. And the problem was that you couldn't, there was no way to tie it into the existing wing bolts in order to be able to tighten the cable and preload that structure. You had to figure out a way to do it from the outside of the wing bolts. I've got a wing bolt around here someplace, but you got to do it from the outside of the wing bolt, out here. Yep. You can't do it from the inside of the wing bolt. And so the only way to do that would be to drill a hole in the wing bolt and tie it in from the outside. But if you drill a hole in the wing bolt, you're going to compromise the integrity of the wing bolt. And the wing bolt's kind of important, it's kind of like a Jesus bolt. So anyway, I get the DER, the fatigue damage tolerance DER, on the phone, Victor, and I send him the spreadsheet about 5 o'clock one afternoon, maybe 5:30, and he calls me on the phone after he looked at it for half an hour, and I swear it was like I was trying to defend a PhD thesis in structures. He started in quizzing me about my spreadsheet. And we spent an hour and a half, 2 hours with him going through every single calculation in that spreadsheet and quizzing me. And, he said, so how are you going to tie this in? I said, well, I want to drill a hole in the wing bolt and tie it in from the outside, put it in compression from the outside of the wing bolt. He says, okay. And I said, my problem is the wing bolt's going to have a hole in it. He says, yeah. He said, I understand. But he said, George, let me tell you something. He said, George, do you know a really good patent lawyer? Yeah, Victor, I do. He says, well, tomorrow morning, you need to go see that patent lawyer. This is the best damn structural fix I've ever seen. I said, okay, Vic, appreciate that. So we went to work, and sure enough, the showstopper was that this wing bolt. And this is the standard T34. It's also the same 7/8 inch bolt that's in the bearings, and it's in the T34. The wing structure, the wing carry through, and the wing spar is pretty much the same in a T34 as it is in a bearing. And so we had to figure out a way to drill a hole in this thing. The problem is you drill a hole in it. This is a 76,000 pound break strength bolt. You drill a hole in it, it reduces it, and it compromises the structural integrity of the wing bolt. So I said, Vic, we got to find some stronger material so we can drill a hole in it. And Vic said, I know just what you need. So we went to work and we found a stronger material. So then the trick is how do you get a cable up through that mouse hole and out to the other side? So we came up with this contraption. And I'm going to run it past you in slow motion here. So this is one side of it, and that's that wing bolt. And then here's this steel cable. And then there's the identical parts on the other side. So I'm going to disassemble one of these for you real quick.
Now, while you're doing that, George, I don't want you to skip over. You were able to, you said you found another material, but you found another material going all the way back to the Apollo program and the Saturn V.
Yeah, it's a stronger material, and it's a lot stronger. And so we developed this thing. So here's this cable, and we've got this little extension on it that was real essential. And you'll love the provenance and the origin of this cable. This cable is made specially for us by one of the world's largest manufacturers of large ocean-going sailing boats. They use these cables to support the mast on these sailing boats. And I just looked at our old data. This cable, it's this thick. This cable, we've not yet broken one of them, and we've had them loaded up to 17,000 pounds.
Wow, truly aeronautical, right?
You could pick up the cab of a tractor trailer truck or something with this thing. And so what you do is you go and you open up the mouse hole on one side and you thread this up through the mouse hole, thread it through to the other side where you've got this little rod, and you screw the rod in. And once you screw the rod in, then you've already got the wing bolt in place. And so the wing bolt's in place in the wing, and you take this rod and you run this rod through the bolt. And then when you get the rod out on the other side, you put a nice little cap on it, and then you put this little screw on it. And the beauty of this screw is that it's a screw. And it sits there, and when you get it all installed on both sides, you take the screw and you torque it down to about 200 inch-pounds or something. And then because of the testing that we did with string gauges on the cable, we know that if you turn it, it's like 2.75 additional turns, 2 3/4 additional turns. It preloads the cable to 8,000 pounds. Well, 8,000 pounds exactly offsets 4G on the wing structure. That's all measured and verified in flight with string gauges on all that structure. At one point, we had 113 or 114 string gauges on our T-34 to measure all that up. So here's the fun part of this. This super bolt that we developed, I want to show it to you. You can see through it. Tim Roehl gave it a name. He said, George, we got to name this bolt. I hereby name it the Holy Bolt. So I'm holding the Holy Bolt. And it's the holy bolt that, by the grace of God, saved the entire fleet of the T-34 aircraft. We've installed this on 90% of the outstanding T-34s that are out there that have got this cable. We call this the airframe life extension cable, or otherwise known as ALEC.
That's amazing. And
if
like
you ask me what the single most unique or innovative thing that we've ever done around here, I'd have to tell you it's this cable. And it, you know, like I say, it pretty much saved a fleet of aircraft from being turned into museum pieces or beer cans.
So to everyone out there, you go to Sun and Fun, you go to AirVenture, you see all these lined up T-34 mentors out there. You watch them fly in an air show. You come over and thank George and offer to buy him a beer.
Not necessary. The beauty was, I mean, it cost like $100,000, $80,000 to do that center section repair. And I think when we started selling these in 2010 or 11, they were like $11,000. And they took 3 hours to install. Oh, and here's a funny story that goes with it. The FAA was just obsessing, thinking, well, that cable's going to stretch and then it's going to quit loading the spar. And how are we going to know when it stretches and how much it stretches? And so we're going to have to go back and retension and retorque these things, you know, every 12 months or something crazy like that. And I said, guys, this cable is pre-stretched to 14,000 pounds before we put it in there. It's not going to stretch. Well, you're going to have to prove that. How are we going to do that? I said, okay, I got an idea. I picked up the phone and I called, guess who? Julie Clark. Does Julie fly aerobatics? Oh yeah, at the time Julie was flying aerobatics. Did Julie have a T-34? Julie had a T-34. I said, Julie, we need your help. She said, anything we can do, George. And I said, well, I want you to bring your plane here and let us put one of these ALEC cables in. But when we do it, I'm going to put strain gauges on it. And when we load it up, we're going to measure the load on the strain gauges. And then we're going to stuff all the wires back up in your wing and we're going to leave them there. And once a year, after you've flown 10 or 15 air shows and done all those aerobatics, you're going to come back to Ada. We're going to pull the wires out, hook them up to the instrument and remeasure the load on the cable so that we can prove to the FAA that the cable doesn't stretch. And we did that for 4 straight years. God bless her. Julie had come down. I always loved it because Julie, she liked to hug on me. You know, for an old guy, that was pretty nice stuff. And so Julie'd come and get out of her airplane and run up and throw her arms around me and give me a big hug and say, thank you, George, thank you, George. And then we'd go in there and pull the wires out, hook it up to the instruments and measure it, write a report and send it to Wichita to the FAA at the Small Airplane Directorate, or to Kansas City rather. And finally, after the 4th year, the engineers at Kansas City said, okay, George, you can quit doing that. So Julie got to quit coming data every year.
Oh, that's awesome. I absolutely love that story, and the fact you were able to find a material an advanced material to make those bolts and make the holy bolt, as Tim says, and save a fleet there. I want to ask you get your thoughts on one last question. You know, you've said to me on more than one occasion, you've started off a sentence saying, if you had 30 more years, you know, all the different things that you could probably do in general aviation. What do you think? What would you say to the folks out there as to what the challenges are moving forward to keep this fleet going, and what can we do to get, you know, maybe to keep things going, but also to find some way to keep people doing what George Roehl's been doing for so long, and keep this moving forward?
I see no reason at all that 300 horsepower engine behind us, with appropriate electronic engine controls and the right unleaded fuel, cannot be operated at 360, 370 horsepower on takeoff, and
Wow.
with unleaded fuel, and with basically full-time climbs with Lena peak mixtures at 300 horsepower. And think about that a second. The fuel flow goes from 35 to 40 gallons an hour down to 20. And so you save tons of fuel. you climb faster, more efficiently, the engine's cleaner. All that can be done with the electronic controls that we've already developed and would have had on the market 5 years ago, except that we've been distracted by this little problem with safe gas. So yeah, there's a bunch of that to be done yet.
Wow. Well, I hope we get 30 to 50 years more of your guidance with that, and I hope someone picks it up and we keep getting more and more of the brilliance that has been the work that you and Tim have done on these aircraft. And like you mentioned, whether it's Cirrus, Bonanzas, so many different and 100 low lead replacement that's gonna affect every aircraft on the planet, that every piston aircraft out there. So
let me say one other thing for you. We're sitting here, and I don't know whether anybody's heard it in the background, but standing over here about 20 feet from me are 3 mechanics that are working on an airplane. It's what, 8 o'clock at night, because they're trying to get an airplane to a customer tomorrow. That's in this big TAT hangar. And we've got one of the most incredible groups of people that work around GAMI and TAT. And it's really, really satisfying to work with these people. And, you know, it's a really small town, but if you're interested in airplanes and good engines and technology, the only place you can go do that other than right here in Ada, Oklahoma, is to go to Oklahoma City or Tulsa and work for Tinker or American Airlines in Tulsa. But, you know, these people that are interested in that live in southeastern Oklahoma get to come here and do that. And we've got an awful lot of really good talent and people here. And Tim and I couldn't even begin to do this without the quality of the people that are here helping us.
But that speaks volumes, and
yeah.
and good people follow good people, and
I mean, there really, really are, and there's not a day that I leave here and drive home that I don't think about that.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate everything that you've done for General Aviation and continue to do and will do into the future. I appreciate you taking time to join us here on SocialFlight Live. We have gotten some questions, so I want to leave people with a teaser here because they want to know what in the world that bolt's made out of, and we want to just tell them they can go research the Saturn V program to learn a little bit to answer that question of how you found the material.
Yeah, this bolt, this piece, the nut, all that stuff, you know, it's all made out of a very special high-tech alloy that pretty much saved the Saturn V program.
So do some research on how, if for anyone who wants to go solve a mystery there without getting the answer, do some research to find out how, I believe it was Werner von Braun now back then, solved the Saturn V problem, weight problem, by reducing all the bolt sizes and changing to a very, very, very special steel alloy material. And that's exactly what has saved the T-34 fleet with George's help.
Precisely.
All right, George, thank you so much again for joining us tonight here on SocialFlight Live. I hope you'll join us again because we could talk forever, and I know people want to hear it.
After we get the last of the STCs done, maybe we can revisit this, and maybe I'll have a bottle of champagne sitting over here in a glass, and we can have a toast together.
It's a date. You got it. That would be a wonderful show to have when you're sitting on that STC and just talking about future fun projects and not the 12 years that brought you here.
Hail Mary. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, George. I really appreciate it. And you have a wonderful night.
You bet. Take care.
And thank you to all of you that joined us tonight here on SocialFlight Live. We will be back next Tuesday, February 15th, with actor and pilot Treat Williams. We're going to do some great hangar flying. Boy, the stories that Treat has will just keep you riveted on the edge of your seat. It's just going to be a whole lot of fun. And then the week after that, February 22nd, we're off. We're going to be out there flying. So we've got the week off from SocialFlight Live, but we come back on Tuesday, March 1st with Chuck Aaron. And if you've ever seen that Red Bull helicopter doing aerobatics out of a helicopter, then you need to spend an evening with SocialFlight Live and Chuck Aaron. And then on Tuesday, March 8th, the first female Thunderbolt pilot, Nicole Malachowski, is coming back for an encore appearance to talk to us here again. So again, thank you so much. Appreciate it for everyone joining us and taking this time out of your evening to join us here on Social Flight Live. And I wish you all blue skies.